So again, welcome everybody. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, and we are with you all to talk about the effective management of quizzes, session number 2 for this first shared workshop of 2021. And again, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. It was great talking with you all last week. Noticed that a number of you had went back into the course and viewed the recording, so that's great to see. Happy to have all the questions that we had last week, and again, happy that this has been useful for you all. So again, welcome back, and we look forward to working with you today. So as always, feel free, if you guys have any questions, comments, feel free to speak up. This is a very informal environment. So post some questions in the chat. We have our team here, Catalina, Bree, and Andy on the line, in addition to myself presenting. But post questions in the chat. Feel free to speak up at any time, and we're here to help. So with that being said, I think we can just jump right in here. And one of the big topics that I wanted to talk about today was question types and just the idea of getting into questions themselves. So last week we talked a lot about the idea of creating questions creating quizzes themselves. And talking about those quiz settings, we talked about the Safe Exam Browser, as Ed had mentioned a couple minutes ago. So today we're going to focus a bit more on questions themselves, question types, creating a question, and then we have some other topics that I want to talk about in addition, such as exceptions, user exceptions, quiz feedback, and results, reports, and statistics. But I want to take a little bit of time here, just starting off here, to talk about creating questions in general. Again, I know that some of this is probably pretty basic, but I think I like the idea of kind of setting the base and kind of going through the idea of creating a question, just because I know we all do this, and oh, sorry about that, jumped the slide. We've all been doing this for some time, I believe, and we all know how to write a question, right? But when you think about it and you break it down, really there's, essentially up to anywhere from 6 to 8 steps that you can take to write a question. So when you create a question, you have to choose the question category first, right? So when you're creating a question, what question category are you creating that in? Are you creating that in the course question category, or are you an admin creating it, for example, at the site level or at the category level? So that the first step there is select the question category. And again, I'm not sharing a demo at the moment just yet, but as you guys can probably envision, creating a question type, you choose the question type first. You select the question category, give the question descriptive name. That descriptive name, just as a reminder, is not shown to students. They see the question name itself, but the descriptive name is shown in the stats and the reports. As it sounds, descriptive, more descriptive for yourself, right? For the instructor or the administrator. So rather than just saying 4 + 4, you might have a specific descriptive name for that. And then you create the question, you or the instructor creates the question using the ADO-HTML editor. Again, pretty straightforward, but some tips and tricks is, in addition to adding text, as you guys are probably all aware, you can add media and other recording tools too. One thing to think about when you do add media and other recording tools is think about accessibility. I'm sure that you guys all do. I know personally, I feel like accessibility has really, when I started with Blackboard back in 2011, and since I've come through and now being with OpenLMS, I feel like accessibility has really become a large topic of conversation. And really, when I started my journey in e-learning years ago, it was talked about, but not as much as it is now. So I think that's definitely something that we definitely want to think about. And just on that topic, anything with a picture or an audio needs alternative options for people who can't see or hear that. And Ed, I think you made a comment here. Yeah, there's an art to writing good questions, especially multiple choice, and then there's so much value in quality specific feedback, especially for formative assessments. Just 2 cents from the peanut gallery. Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. That's part of this shared workshop, right? Is we want to share our comments and etc. So yeah, no, you're right on. There really is an art to writing good questions. It's not that. Again, that's kind of why I wanted to kind of talk through this is, because that's something that's really sometimes you don't think about it much. If you're an instructor in a hurry and you're creating questions, you're just going to put the questions out there. You don't think much about the descriptive name, and you're trying to create a quiz as quickly as possible sometimes. Hopefully that's not the case, but if an instructor's in a hurry, that might be the case, So yeah, you're right. There really is an art in writing good questions, for sure, having value in that feedback, and we'll talk a bit more about feedback too. So yeah, first three, select question category, give the descriptive name, create the question itself, right? Those kind of speak for itself. Set the default points. So I think somebody had asked this last week. I can't remember if it was Kim or Carrie possibly. That when you create a quiz, it defaults to a certain set of points, and then when you create the question itself, it defaults to 1. But you can change that default value to 5, for example, if you want a question to be worth 5 points. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Thanks, Kim. Yeah. So you can set the default points when you create the question. Or it can be overridden at the quiz level, where you can assign individual marks or let the quiz scale. Again, visualizing what we talked about near the end during the last week's call. You can let the quiz scale the marks based on the total points and the number of questions. And I'm just going to go in here into my demo environment and just go to questions and add a question. Create a new question, and I'll just choose, for example, true, false. We'll talk about some of these other options, but yeah. So the descriptive name, question name, right? Question text, default mark, as Ed mentioned. Add general feedback. The feedback is important. I think again, the feedback's not required, as you can see here, but I think feedback is very important to add. ID number is not required. I don't know really how personally, I've never seen that being, it doesn't provide a whole lot of value. I think it's helpful, but it's not required, obviously. And then for, obviously the feedback changes for certain types of question types. For example, true, false, it definitely changes. And then, building out the responses. So this varies from question types also. So for true, false, it's obviously, it's a little different, but if you have multiple choice, for example, you can weight scores. So, you might say 3 of the answers with multiple choice are worth 33 1/3%, and to receive the full credit, they have to choose all 3 of them. That's multiple select, essentially. So, and then you get into one of the other settings that I don't see being used as often, but again, that's me more from the teaching and learning side of things as an administrator. But you guys might be familiar with the multiple tries penalty, where you can control how much a user is penalized for each incorrect answer. So if there's multiple tries, if there's an option for multiple tries, and you want to allow the student to re-answer that question, but you want them to get penalized, this is the area where you can show, the penalty for each incorrect try there. And just looking at the chat here, so I've not seen that used. Yeah, I think I think it is a setting that is one that's a lesser setting that's used. But again, just kind of talking through these settings, I just wanted to kind of make you guys aware of some of these options here. So, and if you are using, with this multiple tries, obviously with true false, it kind of speaks for itself. But you have to add hints if if you're using multiple choice and things like that. If you're using interactive multiple tries, so. But yeah, it's something where I just kind of wanted to start off with talking about the question, the actual question itself, and creating the question, and the fact that it is a standard setup for all the question types essentially. Obviously, things change a little bit per question type, but it is, you do have to kind of start off with, each process of, choosing the actual question type, choosing the category, and again, going down the line there then. So, any questions or comments about just that process there, So yeah, and then going back to, just the questions themselves. So as you guys, again, are probably all familiar with, but there's over 20 question types available in your OpenLMS site. The way we kind of look at the question options is, there's standard options, and the standard is, the ones that are a little bit easier to use, such as description, true, false, multiple choice, matching. Those of them, those options that are questions that are used quite often, to be honest, probably. And then you have the more complex options, such as calculated, simple, drag and drop options, and then there's a number of other ones. So, we like to kind of, there's kind of a difference between one and the other. That the standard options, again, most instructors can really jump right into those and say, I've been an instructor this is my first gig out of college maybe, and I know how to use the standard options, right? It's pretty straightforward, but the complex options might take a little bit more training. So just something to think about it, if you're thinking about training or something like that. Again, you guys are probably familiar with this, but something to think about, that these options are a little bit more complex, and I'll go into that detail a little bit more. But one thing I wanted to show just while we jump back and forth from a demo environment is, again, I showed you guys this last time just as a quick refresher. You guys are probably all familiar with this, but when you go to the site administration settings, and if you go to plugins and question types, and if you go to manage question types, this is where you can see from an administrator which question types you have available in your site. So if, for example, you don't see a certain question type and it's available in the plugin matrix, that's something where you can say, okay, you know what, I'm going to reach out to the support team and have them install that. So again, I know I referenced this last week, but I think it's good to know, what exists, and again, for those of you who might be a newer admin, if you weren't aware of that, again, I don't want anybody to look at this and say, okay, this is all we have. If there isn't a specific option that you think should be available and it's not here, again, look at the plugin matrix, see which ones are available, and you can request that via support ticket, and they'll get that installed in your sandbox and/or production site. So, and then in terms of, so one thing, I had mentioned this last week as a little bit of a teaser, but one thing I wanted to kind of show you guys here is that the quiz question book activity that our own Andy Braden here had created. And I just want to go through that a little bit to kind of show you what he created and kind of the general idea. So let me go into this. It's in this effective management of quizzes course that you guys have accessed to log into this Collaborate session here. And it's actually in this introduction area here. So if you scroll down and you see question types, so you can see, again, Andy gathered all of this information, and it wasn't a copy and paste thing. He took a lot of time to really, he pulled in details from other resources, but I think that this is a really nice resource where some of it may just be some general information again that maybe he grabbed from the Moodle documentation, but it also goes into detail with his experience of using all of these question types. For example, the random short answer. There's a couple notes that he mentions here in terms of the student sees a normal matching question type if they're a short answer. There are more short answer questions in the category than the number selected to be used. Each time the question is attempted, it will have a new mix of questions. So just some kind of tips and tricks in there. You can see close. He goes into detail and provides some tips here. So, but let me just kind of start at the top. I won't go through every single section here, but the writing and question, the details that I had talked about is in this writing and question area. So, we think that this might be a good resource for you guys to use down the road. If you ever want to do some training on, to instructors on, writing a question. Again, seems pretty straightforward, but sometimes, instructors might not think of this. So, you guys can use this resource and, put this book resource or, grab whatever you want from it and use it in your environment. So, writing a question, again, talking about the standard types and complex types. So he broke it down really well into, again, the standard and complex types, as you can see. Standard types, as it mentions, are familiar and not too complex and are fairly easy to use. Complex types are looking at that the other way around, more sophisticated, right? They need some explanation and additional setup. That's the best part about this all, right? Is this is a really good start, but if you guys need to modify it as needed, feel free. So yeah, thanks again, Andy. We really appreciate that. And yeah, I knew that this would be a good topic of conversation. Again, I think that this can really be powerful when it comes to teaching instructors. And you can see, based on what I've talked about here, I wanted to use this kind of as a base to start our conversation here today, because again, it might be a little basic, but I think sometimes during these workshops, I think it's important to talk about some of these basic things again, because during these workshops, what we're trying to do is kind of slow things down a little bit, right? And take the time to go through certain topics a little bit more in detail than we would in just like a quick sessions. Standard types, just going into each option. So you can see, I won't go through every single option, as you can imagine, but good screenshots. And again, with the standard types, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like true, false. That kind of speaks for itself. True, false, matching, essay, etc. But again, I think that there's some good, there's a good tip here for essay that you can go through. So I won't go through every single one of these. But when you look at the complex types, right? So calculated, that really, it goes into a lot of detail and explains how the student will see this question. You can see the screenshot. I think it's really important to know, and quite a bit of text, but I think it's important to understand it. Again, as we were talking about with these complex types, it does take a bit of understanding. You're not just going to jump right in and say, I'm going to create a calculated question if I've never used it before. You really have to go through and really understand what exactly you're doing. So again, with the essence of time, I won't go through every single option here, but you can see some of the tips and tricks here. I just kind of wanted to show you a couple of the drag and drop options in the environment. Again, you guys might already be familiar with this, but for those of you that might not be, let me go back to my course here. And there's another comment. Especially setting up ranges for numerical answers, Ed says in his humble opinion. Definitely, yeah. So let me go. So yeah, the drag and drop options again. Yeah, I wanted to take a little bit of time just to show you guys a couple examples, and it may be fairly straightforward, but yeah, I thought it'd be helpful just to kind of show you guys this for those of you that have not used them. Oh, and then I guess show of hands, is there anybody that might want to speak up that says they have not used drag and drop options? When you upload an image, you know, if I'm somebody that, you know, I'm a new instructor again, let's say I've uploaded an image, and I'm not sure where it exists, it pops up down here, and you might say, okay, well, where do I go to add question or add the answers, essentially, you know, the text that goes into the image. Again, for someone that might not be familiar with this, you might not know what these words down here mean. And again, that's why I kind of wanted to show you this as an example. So markers. So you can see here, marker 1, marker 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on. And then number 1. So these are the markers. So the way you get the words on the image up here is by creating the markers. And you can create as many markers as you'd like, as you can imagine. So that's kind of the first step, is you upload the image, you add the markers, and then the drop zones. So where exactly do you want those answers to appear, right? You get the option of showing, you know, this is more visual, right? The circle, polygon, or the rectangle. Then you have the marker, and then the coordinates, obviously, is where the details of where it's going to appear on the image. So yeah, so I just wanted to take a moment and kind of show, you know, it's fairly straightforward, I feel like, but for those of you that have just heard of the drag and drop into image and haven't used it, you might say, oh, you know what, this puts an example with, and then going back here, the drag and drop into text. So you guys are, again, might be familiar with this, but the idea here is you have text that you want to be popped into the phrase here. Again, this is one add on your comment of H5P. For those of you that might be using H5P, I have seen this. I have seen some organizations say, you know what, I like the H5P version because it does work pretty well. But again, you know, you might say, well, we're not using H5P and we want to use the standard option. Is there a way to kind of use this option? And this is the drag and drop into text where, you know, you just pop it in there wherever you want, right? So with the drag and drop into text, if I go to the question itself, again, I'll just jump down into, you know, because again, everything else is pretty straightforward up here. Well, I take that back. I say that, and, you know, after the first two are very similar, but drag and drop into text. So the question text, right? So you create the question text, but the way the drag and drop, the way the blanks appear is by way of this code, if you will. So you can see the answer and then the group down here. So you can see the answers: linear, equation, inequality, and equality. The reason why we see them the way we see them here is based off of, you know, what order they're in. But then as you come here, you can see the 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you get the question text. You can shuffle the choices if you'd like, which I think I've seen a lot of instructors like to do, just that way that they are shuffled per question, you know, if multiple tries happen and things like that. But then you have down and go into the combined feedback, and we talked about the feedback earlier. Your answer is correct, or for a partially correct answer, your answer is partially correct. And then, you know, you have the option of showing the number of correct responses once the question is finished too. So let me stop for a moment here. Again, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to show you guys those drag and drop options, because I do feel like those were the complex options that, again, going back to Andy's comment of the calculated ones being quite messy, and it would take quite a bit to understand. I feel like this, you could say, you know what, I think Carrie had mentioned that you haven't used these. You might say, hey, you know what, let's start using maybe you use one at a time, right? Say drag and drop into image. I feel like that one is a pretty neat tool. And you might say, hey, each instructor, I'd like you to start using drag and drop into image. You use a couple of these a couple times in some quizzes. And, you know, again, I think those drag and drop options, personally, you know, if I'm a student, I feel like it engages me a little bit more rather than seeing a list of questions of, you know, a bunch of text. Again, not saying that that's a bad thing, but I think engaging students a little bit more if you use those images and kind of the questions become a little bit more interactive, right? I'm actually having to move my cursor rather than you know, just type some text into something or choose a select box or you know, something like that. So and going back to the idea of what types of questions are being used. If, for example, you wanted to make an initiative and say, I'd like every instructor to use, you know, five of the drag and drop into image question types, you could very quickly go down to site administration, plugins, question types, and manage question types and see how many are being used. So you might say, you know, today I'd like everybody to start using these, or maybe it's the beginning, prior to the semester starts, and, you know, 2 weeks later you can come in here and say drag and drop into image and say none are being used, and you could go back and say, you know, you don't have an idea of who, you know, if this number goes up, you don't have an idea of who is not using it or who is, but at least you can say, you know what, from an administrative perspective, I know that none of you are using this, and we're really trying to make this push. So it's just a couple more tools that you could use as an administrator. So again, I'll stop for a moment. Any questions or comments? I know it took a little bit of time. That was kind of my ideas. I really wanted to take some time and talk about the questions themselves and the question types. Any questions, comments about this before I get into the other 4 topics about reusing questions and exceptions and things like that? Okay. So again, yeah, the next couple of topics I want to talk about is just a little bit more, not as detailed as you can imagine. But yeah, the reuse of questions in different courses is one of the topics that I just wanted to talk about a little bit here. So again, starting from a basic perspective, you know, the questions, when you create them, are created into categories, and a new course starts out with a category, you know, so default 4. So again, if I go into create a question, you can see default for Math 103, for example. I can also see top for system right here and category, because I'm a site administrator in this site. So if I was an instructor, though, I would not have top for system or top for miscellaneous category. So, you know, going back to the idea of reusing questions in a different course, the idea here is I'm not sure if you guys have looked at, there's some documentation, some core Moodle documentation out there related to, it's called the question sharer role, where instructors could access any questions which have been added to the category level and for the whole system. So as you can imagine, with this question share role, it's a specific role where you'd have to create that role and then assign it at the system level to whatever instructors you'd want to be able to do that. But Ed had mentioned this before, you know, we had started the recording, and you know, just as we were talking earlier, is the idea that, you know, when you're allowing instructors to share questions, then you get into the concern of, is there a specific instructor that's changing a question that's being used in a course, and they're not aware of that question being used or being edited, So there's a little bit of a concern there. And I see, Ed, where I think you had mentioned earlier that you don't allow your instructors to kind of edit the questions or share the questions that way just because of that. So but just something to think about, the fact that you can use questions in different courses. I've also seen other organizations say, you know what, I'm going to create a course and call it, Math 101 and enroll all and use the course as not a student resource, but more of as a faculty resource, and enroll, all the Math 101 teachers into it and let them create the questions in that question bank. But again, it depends on if you want, instructors to be able to reuse the questions in different courses. So with that being said, anybody have any questions or comments in terms of sharing any tips or tricks that you guys like to add, or just, again, just thoughts in terms of this detail? While we're waiting for anybody, the one thing I would say is, by default, again, that you guys are probably all familiar with, is by default a course teacher cannot see or use any question context above the course level. So going back to my slides here. So again, just some topics that we thought would be important to talk about. Again, for those of you that are probably familiar with this, maybe you're not. Exceptions and user or group overrides. So have you ever had a student sick or unable to log in and need more days to complete a quiz? That might be an option for a group user override. Or, for example, is there a teacher teaching two different groups of students, but they want to use the same quiz at different times throughout the course? That's a good option for a group override. So for those of you that might not be familiar with this, again, a little bit of a basic topic, but if you're not familiar with this, the overrides actually appear in their own topics here. So you can just see in the screenshot there, and if I actually go back into the environment here, you actually have to go into the quiz itself here. And I'm going to go and click on the quiz name here, and then give the gear icon in the upper right-hand corner, and you can see under the quiz administration area here, that's where you have the option of doing the group or user overrides. Once you're here, then you can go through and add the steps of the user override, for example. So you can say add user override. What user do you want to be overridden? So my test student might be Paul Smith here. So I'm going to say I want Paul Smith to be able to take this quiz after the fact, and it's going to be at a different time, completely different time. So I'm going to say, let's say this quiz was open until February 2nd, but Paul Smith was sick, and he's come to me and said, yeah, here's my doctor's note. I really, so I didn't reach out to you sooner. It looks like I didn't complete the quiz, but it's because I was sick. You have the option as an instructor to say, okay, great, I'm going to give you the option of taking this quiz on February 4th. Or a time frame, or however that works, and then save that option. When you do that, then you get to see as an instructor, if you go to quiz administration and user overrides, you can see where the overrides are for and who they're for. So you can create multiple overrides if you'd like, and again, that won't affect the other users in the course. You can also see the group overrides options. Obviously, if you don't have any groups created in the course itself, then you can't use a group override. It kind of speaks for itself. But just as a quick little tidbit for those of you that have, I'm guessing that everybody has created groups, but just to get off topic for a quick moment, if you haven't, you go to course administration, users, and groups. And you can see in this course, there's no groups. That's why I didn't have the option of using that group override. So You would have to go in here, create a group, pull those users into the group, and then that's how you can use that. So just put a little link to the documentation, group and user overrides, kind of some details there. But again, fairly straightforward topic. Again, something that we just thought it'd be helpful. Back when I was in support, I feel like got this question every now and then where, we have a student that's been sick and they're, we want to be able to provide them extra time. How do we do that? I think that user override is a good option. So talking about quiz feedback. So jumping topics again a little bit here. Quiz feedback. So again, something that we've kind of dabbled in a little bit over the last call and this call a little bit, but again, just thought it'd be something that we think it's something that's been brought up enough that we thought it'd be good to talk about. So there are multiple types of feedback available. So the first kind of bullet point looking at here, number of settings. So there's a number of settings in the review options area. Again, everyone's probably familiar with this review options area. Let me go back into it right now. But yeah, so in the review options area, specific, general, right answer, and overall feedback. So let me go back into one of my quizzes here. And again, the review options area, as you'll see in a moment here, and as you guys probably are all familiar with, but just, something to make note of is when I go into the settings of the quiz itself, you have the review options here. And for those of you that might not have looked at this, and I'm guessing that everybody probably already has, but there are 4 topics that you really want to focus on. Is that during the attempt, immediately after the attempt, later while the quiz is still open, and after the quiz is closed. I also wanted to kind of focus on, just in terms of general quiz feedback, the fact that video and audio feedback for options for answers can be used. Personally, I think that using these methods can really be a great learning mechanism, as I put here in the bullet point. But I think it provides that little bit more of a interactive or personalized feedback, right? Is that rather than seeing just text, if they get you saying something, giving them feedback by way of a minute video or audio mention, I think that it gives them a little bit more personalized learning, if you will. Yeah, and then the last topic that I wanted to talk about here, just before we kind of do a wrap up here, and in terms of what we talked about here, is the results, reports, and statistics. So again, I think that this, in the quiz administration area, I think that this has some really great details that you can find out here. You can see just my screenshot there in the upper right-hand corner. The results, if you haven't broken that down before and really looked at that, you can see that there's grade responses, statistics, and manual grading. Personally, again, this is just a general comment. I feel like this statistics sometimes is a report that gets overlooked, just because it is a little bit lower down there, and for instructors that might be looking at the detail, they might really just be looking for the grades, right? And as you guys are probably all aware, you don't need this. You don't have to go to the results and grades area to see the grades. If you're an instructor, you can just click on the course and view all responses, and you'll get that detail there. So, so I just kind of wanted to show you guys the idea of where this lives, the results, reports, and statistics area that it lives. So going back to the area here, so if I drop down results, and you can see again grades. In this course, I don't have any users enrolled in this course. Let me see if I should have a course that's set up here. Thanks again, Ed. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Louie. Thanks, Sierra. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for your time.